Beneath the gleam of polished steel, beneath the banners fluttering proud in the wind, and beneath the songs that tell of honor, bravery, and chivalry, there lies a truth far darker than any bard will sing. The medieval knight, so oft painted as a noble hero, a guardian of the weak, a champion of the just, was not always so. Behind the shining armor beat hearts that hungered not only for glory, but for blood. Behind the noble crest were hands that wrought cruelty, greed, and deceit. These are no fair tales of gallantry, but the shadowed truths they sought to bury in silence. Tales of hidden bloodlust, of cruelty toward the peasantry, of treachery with sworn enemies, of plunder under holy banners, of unspeakable violence against the innocent, of fear and torture, of duels born of pride, of sport in human death, of secret orders cloaked in mystery, and of glory crafted from falsehood. Here are the dark truths of knights, laid bare for the first time. If the truth that history hides stirs thy soul, then tarry with me. Let thy hand give its mark of favor, let thy tongue speak of this tale to others, and let thy heart subscribe to the telling of truths the minstrels dare not sing, for here the armor cracks and the man is revealed. In the high days of the Middle Ages, when the clang of sword on shield was the heartbeat of kingdoms, the knight was seen as the very pillar of honor. They swore oaths before God and Lord, proclaiming loyalty, justice, and the defense of the weak. Yet these vows were but parchment, easily sworn, easily torn. Beneath the solemn rituals and the kneeling at the altar, there burned a hunger, not merely the hunger to serve, but the hunger to fight, to conquer, to bathe in the chaos of battle. For many, warfare was no burden but their breath, their identity, and their delight. The tourney, that merry image of lance and skill in later centuries, was in its birth a thing of chaos and blood. The lists were not neat fields of sport, but open grounds where men charged as packs, striking not to unseat, but to maim, to kill. Lances splintered in ribs, swords cleaved helm and skull alike, and the field was left strewn with the groaning and the dead. Such slaughter was not lamented. It was the mark of a day well spent. In some lands, a tournament without death was a dull affair indeed. For what is a victory without the measure of blood? Many knights in days of peace were restless, for peace brought them no coin, no fame, and no song in the hall. Some whispered of knights who stirred quarrels between lords, who let insult fester into feud, that they might once more draw sword in earnest. Mock battles often turned real when temper and steel were loosed, and in the mayhem new skills in killing were honed. In truth, the line between honor and bloodlust was as thin as the edge of a blade. The crusading knight, swearing that his cause was God's alone, oft found his heart racing more for the plunder and the slaughter than for the salvation of souls. When the drums of war fell silent, there were those who missed the killing, who longed for the rush of the charge and the thrill of the kill, for in their heart's battle was not duty, it was desire. Yet their violence was not for enemies alone. The peasants, the tillers of soil, the bent, backed men and women who filled the granaries were under the knight's hand as surely as the sword at his side. The knight was not merely a warrior, he was a lord, and his word law. The peasant who failed in tax or harvest met not with patient counsel, but with lash, brand, or blade. Fingers were severed for theft, backs scarred for defiance, and gallows raised for those who stood against the will of their master. Such punishments were no shame to the knight, but his right. Many saw the peasantry not as men and women, but as beasts for labor, souls whose worth was counted only in service. In darker tales, some knights used condemned vagrants and criminals as living dummies, practicing their strikes upon flesh and bone. Such cruelty did not bring disgrace, it brought awe, for it marked the knight as strong and merciless. When raids came, the peasants were driven to fight with no training, thrust forward as shields for the armored elite who watched from horseback. Whole villages could be burned or starved for the trespass of one, for in the law of the sword, mercy was weakness. In the fields, the knight's shadow brought fear, not safety. Oaths of fealty, sworn with solemnity, were not always unbroken. In the smoke of long wars, behind the walls of tent or keep, many a knight whispered with the enemy. Gold, land, or safe passage were enough to loosen tongues and open gates. A castle might fall not to siege engines, but to a key turned by treachery. Some knights feigned retreat, letting the foe advance, only to betray their own in secret accord. In the 100 Years' War, and in crusading lands alike, it was not rare for a knight to sell arms or secrets to those they had sworn to destroy. To the chroniclers, such acts were treason. To the knight, they were cunning, moves made for survival, for fortune, or for the favor of whichever side might triumph. And in the Crusades, where the cry of Deus Vult filled the air, the Holy Cross was too oft a mask for greed. The sons who would inherit no land, the lords whose coffers were bare, the knights whose debts gnawed at their pride, all saw in the holy wars a chance for gain without the stain of sin. With absolution promised, they plundered freely. Cities fell to their swords, not for faith, but for the gold in their vaults. In Constantinople, the Knights of Christ sacked the city of fellow Christians, tore treasures from churches, and defiled holy relics. Women and children alike were taken as spoils, their fate sealed under the banner of God. The line between holy mission and brigandage blurred until it vanished entirely. When walls fell and the fighting was done, there came a cruelty darker still. Women of conquered towns were taken as prizes. Rape was no shame to such men. It was a sign of dominion, a wound not only to the body, but to the pride of the defeated. Forced marriages cloaked in the name of alliance were little more than abduction. The Church forbade it in word, yet rarely punished it in deed, for the sword arm was ever too valuable. The cries of the women went unrecorded, their names lost, their stories buried in silence, while their violators were called heroes. In their own lands, the knight's justice was as feared as his wrath in war. Torture was a tool as common as the spear. The rack, the brand, the slow suffocation, all were known to those who crossed their lord. Dungeons beneath the keep swallowed those who angered the master, whether peasant, rival, or vassal. Trials were but shadows of fairness, for the knight's word outweighed truth. Punishment was often as public as it was cruel, to remind all who held power. And if there was no war, there was always the duel. Pride was the blood of knighthood, and a slight, whether real or imagined, was met with steel. Duels were not always the clean matches sung in courtly verse. Blades were poisoned, allies hid in the wings, judges bribed. Many fought less for justice than for the spectacle, for the eyes of the court, and for the stories that would be told of their valor. There were knights who made sport of death itself, turning the hunt from beast to man. Condemned criminals or captured foes were loosed into the woods, hunted for sport by mounted lords with hounds and bows. Such hunts were done in laughter and feasting, a grim game where the kill was celebrated, the victim's life worth no more than the stag's. Others bound themselves to secret brotherhoods, the Templar, the Teutonic, the Dragon, and many more. Their rites were strange, their loyalty to their order above crown or cross. Rumors spoke of blood oaths, of mock deaths and strange symbols, of treasures guarded and secrets kept unto death. Some grew so mighty they rivaled kings in wealth, and so dangerous they were destroyed in fire and blood. And yet, for all their sins, the knights have left behind a tale of glory, but much of that glory is but ink and lie. Chroniclers were paid to turn cruelty into courage, defeat into divine trial, greed into God's will. Genealogies were forged, banners embroidered with deeds that never were, and songs sung of heroes who, in truth, were little more than ruthless men with well-crafted masks. Thus the image of the knight noble, pure, and gallant, is but a tapestry woven of half-truths and silences. Behind it stands the man, flawed, fierce, and often cruel, and the truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Now, if the truth that hides behind the veil of history stirs thee, if the tales that strip the gold from the armor and show the rust beneath speak to thy spirit, then lend thy strength to the telling. Give thy favor with a like, pledge thy loyalty by subscribing, and let this truth be carried to every hall where the old lies are told. For history is not what they have painted, it is what the blood, the earth, and the silence remember.